Hey, third grade. I hope you guys are all doing phenomenal today. This is Miss Flores, and today we're going to be reading our new story. But before we start reading, we have to go over some of our goals and what we're going to be focusing on while we're reading our text. So here's our first goal, which we've done quite a bit before. So we're going to be determining the meaning of general, academic, and domain-specific words and phrases in a text relevant to a grade 3 topic or subject area. So basically, what that means is that we're going to be determining and figuring out the meaning of words that we don't know the meaning to. How we're going to do this is we're going to use clues that the story gives us. Remember, those are called context clues. So we have to remember to look up, down, and all around the unknown word. Our next learning goal is to describe the logical connection between particular sentences and paragraphs in a text. For example, we're going to be using comparison, cause and effect, and the words like first, second, third in a sequence. So, what in the world does this mean? Well, let's break this one down. When thinking about how concepts in a text connect, we must look in more than one place. The connections in a text cannot be made by reading just one sentence. Instead, we have to figure out the relationships between the information in multiple sentences and paragraphs. To figure out these relationships and connections, we usually have to focus on making comparisons, what the cause and effects are, and the sequence of events and the information that's given to us in the text. So let's take a look down here. If you look at the first anchor chart over here, it says comparing and contrasting. Let's talk about making a comparison. When we're making a comparison, we want to figure out how two things are alike. Sometimes we make comparisons between two stories, but in this text that we're going to read about animals, we're actually going to be making comparison amongst the different animals and their environments within the same text. If you look at this second anchor chart here, it's talking about cause and effect. So remember, cause is why something happens, and the effect is what happens as a result of the cause. So the anchor chart gives us a good example. So if I water my plants, then I'm going to get beautiful flowers. So the cause of my flowers growing is me watering them. So the cause is the watering of the flowers, and the effect is the flowers growing. Some signal words to look for when we're thinking about cause and effect is as a result of, because, or therefore. And there's many more that we can look for as well, but those are just a few of them that we might be familiar with. Another thing we want to look at when we're making connections in our text is sequence. So the author is always going to present information in chronological order or as a list of steps. So when we are figuring out the sequence, we want to use clue words such as first, second, then, next, later, last, finally. I think we've all used those words before. And I also want to point out, at the bottom of this anchor chart, you're going to see this thing called a flow map. That shows you the sequence of events, but it usually gives you pictures of the sequence. I want you to keep this flow map in mind because we are going to see this in our text. So let's start reading. Engineering connection. Animals come in almost every color you can think of. Neon green frogs, bright red fish, and sunny yellow goldfinches. Animals also have many different patterns, such as spots, stripes, or patches. These patterns can help animals blend into their environments. Animals can hide from predators or from the prey they hunt. When engineers create zoo habitats, they try to mimic the natural habitats of animals that live there. This helps the animal meet its needs, like the animal's wild habitat does. Write about it. Study the frog and its habitat in the photo. If you were the engineer, what would you include in the zoo habitat for that frog? Well, I'm looking at this photo down here. If I was creating a habitat for this frog, I'd probably put some water, maybe some rocks for him to sit on, how he's doing in the picture, so he can get a little bit of fresh air. He looks pretty cool in this picture. I think the rest of this text might be pretty interesting. So here's a little investigate lab that we're just going to go over really quickly. So this asks us, how do sea lions stay warm in cold waters? And then we see a little picture of a sea lion over there on the side of the page. Scientists study how some animals, such as sea lions, can survive in the cold environments. How can you use evidence to answer the question in the title? Well, the question is asking me, how do sea lions stay warm in cold waters? I don't really know the answer to this unless I've read about sea lions, so I'm going to read a little bit more. So predict whether a layer of fat will help a sea lion survive in its cold environment. So number one is basically telling me that sea lions have a layer of fat. Do you think that a layer of fat on the sea lion is what helps it survive in the cold environment? Think about it. Let's see if we can find any evidence in our upcoming story. How do living things adapt to survive? Living things have adaptations to help them stay alive or survive. An adaptation is a trait that helps an organism survive, find mates, or reproduce. So if we look at these pictures here, or this flow map, like I showed you guys in the previous slide of sequencing, the first picture says fewer arms, and then it has an arrow to fewer flowers. Underneath, we see more arms, and then it has an arrow to more flowers. So basically what this flowchart is telling us that the fewer arms a cactus has, the fewer flowers it will have. The more arms a cactus has, the more flowers the cactus will have. And here our flowcharts continue. Individuals of the same species may have different traits that provide advantages. A saguaro cactus with more arms can produce more offspring. So the first cactus over here, we see fewer fruit. And over here, we see fewer cacti to reproduce. Down here, we see more fruit. And then what can you infer that the results might be here? If a pear has fewer arms, then it had fewer flowers, and then now we have fewer fruit, we reproduce fewer cacti. Over here, we have more arms, we get more flowers and more fruit. So do you think that there's going to be fewer cacti to reproduce or more cacti to reproduce? If you said more cacti to reproduce, then you have that correct. Survival in different habitats. Each kind of living thing is adapted to live in a certain kind of place. For example, some kinds of plants that grow in cold parts of Earth are covered with hairs. The hairs help keep them warm. A sandfish lizard, a desert animal, digs holes in the sand to avoid predators. The lizard would not survive in the Arctic because there is no sand there. Look at the pictures of the three animals. Write what kind of environment each animal lives in. So let's look where these animals are. Here's a polar bear. What kind of environment are they in? Does it look really hot there? Or is this polar bear sitting on ice and snow? Here's a tree frog. What about this tree frog? Is he in the same environment as the polar bear? Or is his environment more green and more tropical? And then over here we have a camel. The camel's environment is also very different from the polar bear and the tree frogs. The camel, that looks like a desert. Do you think that the camel and the sandfish lizard might live in the same environments? Differences can help living things. A species is a group of living things of the same kind. Each kind of animal and plant is a separate species. Individuals of the same species may have different traits or adaptations that help them survive and reproduce. An individual is more likely to have offspring or babies when it has traits that make it better able to attract mates. Finding mates is one way a species can survive. For example, male whittlebirds with longer tails attract more females for mating than male whittlebirds with shorter tails. So this whittlebird down here, this one with the long tail, he's going to have a better chance of mating with the female than this whittlebird with a shorter tail. Let's look at this down here that says cause and effect. Number 1. Suppose a sea lion cannot eat enough food to keep its thick layer of fat. How might this change affect the sea lion? So if the sea lion doesn't have enough food, then his thick layer of fat won't be as thick. So if the thick layer of fat helps the sea lion to stay warm, what do you think would happen if this thick layer of fat wasn't so thick? Yeah, he might get really cold, or he might not even survive if he can't stay warm. Number 2, use evidence. Adaptations are traits that help living organisms survive. Choose a plant or animal and describe 2 adaptations that help the organism survive in their environment. Well, when I think about this, I think about a polar bear that we saw on the last page. So a polar bear, obviously they live in a really, really cold environment. So in order for them to survive in this environment, they have to have a thick layer of fat and a thick layer of fur. So those 2 adaptations help the polar bear stay warm so they can survive in the cold weather. What animal can you think of? So let's go over this really fast together. How are living things suited to their habitats? Biologists study living things and their environments to understand how they survive. How do plants and animals of the same kind differ in the same environment? Hmm. So how do plants and animals of the same kind differ in their environment? So we have a bunch of different kinds of birds. Different birds live in different places. So they all have many different adaptations in order to be able to survive wherever they live. So here's a couple questions that maybe if you get the chance, you can discuss with whoever you live with. So based on your observations, which traits do you think are most important for the survival of living things in this environment? Explain why you think so. So when you see an animal who lives outdoors in our environment, what traits do you think are the most important that that animal has in order to help them survive? And number 5, the planned construction project may cause the pond to dry up. So if you have a pond near your house, think about this. Just imagine that you do, and imagine that they're going to be doing construction around this pond. So the pond is going to dry up. Choose one pond plant and one pond animal, like a fish or whatever else you think might live in the pond, maybe an alligator. What traits do you think the plant and animal have that will help them survive if the pond dries up? And our last page, stem connection. Think about your favorite animal or plant. Suppose that the animal or plant was no longer anywhere on Earth. How would you feel? Human actions can affect the survival of plants and animals. For example, many turtles are accidentally trapped in fishing nets. This can cause turtles to die if they are not freed from the nets fast enough. Engineers have designed a device that prevents turtles from being tangled in the nets. This piece of technology is called a turtle excluder device, or TED for short. Using technology, engineers discover new ways to help save plants and animals from situations like this. Construct. What other solutions can you think of to save the turtles from being caught in dangerous fishing nets?